coming. It's nice to fill out a room at, like 10:30, even though I know that, it's still early for some folks. So we're going to get right into it because we only have an hour, right, of course. So how we'll proceed basically is I'll read off all of our panelists' bios, and then we'll give them a chance to introduce you all to the books a little bit for a couple minutes, and then I'll have some broader questions to get them in conversation with each other and with you all. And then we'll have about 15, 20 minutes at the end where we'll have audience questions, so you can start kind of preparing some of those as we go along. And I'll just start in the order that I have them. So Addie E. Citchens. Addie was born in Clarksdale, Mississippi, and lives in New Orleans. A graduate of Jackson State University, she studied at Florida State University Creative Writing Program and the Callaloo Creative Writing Workshop. Her work has appeared in The New Yorker, The Paris Review, The Oxford American's Best of the South, Midnight Indigo Speculative Fiction Anthology, and other publications. Her blues history work features prominently in Mississippi folk life, and she has been heard on the Mississippi Arts Hour on Mississippi Public Broadcasting. She was the inaugural recipient of the Farris, Strauss, and Giroux Writers Workshop Fellowship, and her short story, That Girl, won the O. Henry Prize, which is the first thing I read by you, I think, Addie. Dominion is her first novel. Michael Farris Smith is an award-winning writer whose novels have appeared in the Best of the Year list with Esquire, NPR, Southern Living, Garden and Gun, Oprah Magazine, Book Riot, and numerous other outlets, and have been named Indie Next, Barnes & Noble, Discover, and Amazon Best of the Month selections. As a screenwriter, he scripted the feature film adaptations of his novels Desperation Road and The Fighter. Titled for the screen as Rumble Through the Dark. With his band MFS and the Smoke, Smith wrote and released the record Lostville, which was produced by Grammy nominee Jimbo Mathis. He lives in Oxford, Mississippi with his wife and daughters. Rickey Fayne is a fiction writer from rural West Tennessee whose work has appeared in American Short Fiction, Guernica, the Sewanee Review, and the Kenyon Review, among other magazines. He holds an MA in English from Northwestern University and MFA in Fiction from the Michener Center of Writers at the University of Texas. His writing embodies his Black Southern upbringing in order to reimagine and honor his ancestors' experiences. And last but not least, Lucas Schaefer lives with his family in Austin, and The Slip is his first novel. So we have 3 first novels today, which is a kind of interesting coincidence as well. I want to give y'all all a second to just talk a little bit, 2 or 3 minutes. What is your book about? I.e., if you are introducing it to someone, what do you want them to know about it, first and foremost, right? And then we can start right here from my left with Rickey and go along.
Hi. Thank you all for coming. So my novel is The Devil Three Times, and the premise is that the devil has made a deal with Jesus that if the devil can end slavery and racism in the U.S., then Jesus will find a way to let him back into heaven. And in the course of doing so, he sort of takes a liking to one particular family, and so the book is their encounters with the devil over the course of 7 generations.
Thank you. The responses are so funny sometimes. Thank you, Rickey. Yeah, please add it.
Okay. My novel, Dominion, is about a reverend who believes an idle mind is a devil's workshop, but an idle hand belongs on a buttock. And so it's the story of his wife and his wonderful son and the women who love his wonderful son and how they discover that they're looking but not seeing who these men are. And so it's a study on the patriarchy, misogyny, and so much more than church mess, but there is church mess in it.
Thank you. Here, Lucas.
My novel, The Slip, is about a very dorky white teenager from Newton, Massachusetts, who gets in trouble at school and is sent for the summer of 1998 to Austin, Texas. And in Austin, he has a job working at a nursing home, and his boss is named David DeLeese. He's an ex-boxer who immigrated from Haiti to Texas. And over the course of this summer, Nathaniel and David start training together at a boxing gym. And Nathaniel becomes a little bit obsessed with David. David has a very big, brash personality, is very confident. And at the end of this summer, Nathaniel disappears, and the novel follows a huge cast of characters over about 20 years as we find out what happened to him.
Thank you.
So lay your armor down is, the log line is, I guess, there's 2 guys out in the middle of the night, and they're told to go to this old abandoned church in the countryside and go down into the cellar and bring this thing back to us, and they don't know what it is. They're just told you'll know it when you see it. And they get down into the cellar in the dark in the middle of the night, and they find it, and they are not good dudes, but what they find, they are unwilling to go any further with it. But then the question is, what do we do? I think the way I thought about the novel a lot was I found myself thinking and writing about like the notion of fate, I think, and time and destiny. Like, are we like on a path somewhere that we can't change no matter what we do between now and then? Or are we given a series of choices that lead us there, even though we don't really know we're doing it at the time? Because I think that's the situation they're in. They've come to this moment in their life, and they are completely unprepared for it, but you have to deal with it anyway. So I think that's what Armor is largely about, to me anyway.
Yeah, thank y'all. This is really useful too, because it leads into the first question I want to ask y'all, which is kind of about landscape, the relationship between landscape and narrative in Southern fiction, right? And this is about both maybe books that you were thinking about while writing or books that inspired you, but I'm thinking especially here of Michael and Rickey. Michael, this kind of Berdine and Kill relationship that takes place mostly in the dark, about finding, there's a lot of traversing ground in this book, right, in a lot of different ways. And Rickey as well, right? This is especially in the context of slavery. You can't talk about it without marronage, about you like absolute confinement versus like trying to find places where you can do and be things in some different kind of way. So the question for everybody, but I was thinking especially of y'all's two books with this one.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, I feel like for me it was impossible not to think about. I think place is the first thing I think about when I think about writing it, especially when I'm reading other people's work. I think about the first line of Zora Neale Hurston's autobiography, where she says that, time and place have had their say in with me. And so she was like, before you know anything about who I am, you have to know where I came from and what happened there. So that's the mode with which I approach fiction writing. And I feel like, so my novel takes place in a fictional town, but it's really pretty much my hometown. And it's one family over 7 generations, but it's really just my family. And so it's pretty much me thinking about this place that, like, when I was a kid, I wanted so desperately to get away from. And then when I finally did, I look back and I was like, oh man, there's nowhere else like this in the world. And so it's me thinking about that place and what it means to me and how it made me.
Well, me being a Mississippi boy, and the writers that I've read who really influenced me over time, place is just always front and center. And I'm a sucker for landscape and, reading, writers like Carson McCullers and Cormac McCarthy and Faulkner. Like, place is it's its own thing, and its own character. And I just have really been drawn to that over time. And I think there's some there's a poetic nature to it as well, no matter what place it is. It kind of, whether it's an apartment building in Brooklyn or whether it's, the rolling hills of North Mississippi or wherever you are, you can give it its own heartbeat. And I just love the effect that, landscape and setting, all that has on what's going on with the narrative, because it can very much dictate how your characters are dealing with their emotions in any given moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can feel that especially in these two books, but also for Lucas and Addie, right? Like place becomes important, either kind of displacement, and this is related to the next question. So if Lucas and then Addie, you can talk a little bit about the kind of place-based relationship of the work too.
Yeah, my book largely is set around this boxing gym in Austin, and so place was extremely important because I needed every reader to feel what it was like to go into this gym for the first time, as our protagonist Nathaniel would have done, what that would look like, what that would smell like, all of those details.
For me, place is everything in a novel because this particular spot in Clarksdale, which I say has a particular spot on top of hell, it's so much to do with the ideas that people have in the book, the backwardsness people have in the book. And so there isn't a place like it. And so I also think of the landscape as like the black female body, and how we do the earth is reflected in the black female body, and how we're treated in media, in the world, you know, the damage that's done. So the land was both the body of me, my mother, my ancestors, and also the mindscape that you have to like free yourself from.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, this is related to this question almost exactly, right? So I'm glad that you answered last, because I'm interested in the way that some of these novels think about family, work through family as kind of a problem. There's kind of a joke in the beginning of your novel, Lucas, which is like, if you were really worried about the kids, you should ban uncles, right? Like as a kind of like immediate perpetrator. I mean, it's like a kind of thing that everybody knows, right? When something goes wrong, it's primarily in relation, right, especially with children, the family, right? If we saw an adult, you know, whooping a child in the middle of the street, we would be like, no, that's not cool, unless it's like the parent, right? Mom or dad are the only ones who get to beat you half to death and kind of walk away from it. So, and this is really, really true in your book, Addie, with regards to the kind of familial relationships. And to me, and I think Tracy was in here somewhere, I might have seen her, who said something like, oh yeah, the story is really about like Diamond and Priscilla, right? And the way that they kind of forge or like don't have or deny alliances and stuff like that. So I'm interested in how y'all think about revisioning of the family. I mean, these are kind of old but also new questions. I like that in all of these books it gets incredibly messy and unresolved in a lot of ways, right? Which provides a certain kind of like satisfaction for thinking too. So I wonder if y'all can talk a little bit about that. And this is for everybody, but especially Addie and Lucas.
So Diamond in the novel is an orphan. So she's without family, but she's trying to create family with her relationship with Wonder Boy, who is the preacher's son. And so all she ever wanted is family. But Priscilla, on the other hand, all she ever wanted to escape was her family. So family is like the jail that contains us, and, you know, it can be liberatory, but a lot of times it's kind of fucked up. So, you know, we see that in both ends on this story, you know, an orphan wanting to create something that she never had, and somebody wanting to be free from what she always had. So, did that make sense?
Yeah. That was like way more succinct than I would imagine putting it, but that's maybe what I was like thinking in my head about reading it. Yeah.
So when I first moved to Austin in 2006, I started going to a boxing gym similar to the one in the novel. And what I really was fascinated by about this boxing gym is it was one of the few places in Austin, in Texas, maybe in America, where it felt like everyone was. Every race, every age, every profession. There were recent immigrants. There were people who'd been in Austin for 70 years. You know, everyone was together. And I think the central question of my novel is it possible to have a society like that? Are there ways we can find ourselves in each other, even when we're very different? So I think the way that relates to family is that, you know, Nathaniel is, when we think about family, right, it's sort of like a sports team. Like, the sports team we like is just where we were born. And family is kind of similar, right? I mean, you're into it because it's yours, but like that may not actually be in sync with your values or your beliefs or whatever. And so, you know, Nathaniel really starts to see himself in this mentor character of David. And I think that question of like our chosen family versus, you know, the family we inherit is sort of central to the book.
Yeah.
Well, family is one of those words that I think it has a connotation, obviously, when everybody has a connotation of that when you hear the word. And most often it deals with the bloodlines, right? But it's not really that way, you know? Bloodlines don't always make the best families, you know? So many of you nodded. That was a pretty... It's the people you find, you know, over the course of coming and going and doing. I think all the characters, I mean, here clearly are searching for whether it be blood or not. You know, it's people who love each other and care for each other and relate to each other. And I also think, too, like going back to the kind of notions of time, I think it evolves. too. Like your family when you're 20 may not feel like your family when you're 30 or 40 or 50 or like whatever, just because of the people that move in and out of your life and the things that go on. It feels almost like it has a search component too, when I think of the word family sometimes now. And, and characters who are looking and searching, which all these are, everybody's characters are reaching for something. And that's, I guess, searching for family are those people that become that to you. It's kind of part of the journey.
Yeah, I think for me in my book, what I was most interested in thinking about was how the sort of expectations we put on familial roles sort of stand in the way of family members getting to know one another as people, right? Like, I feel like we have all these expectations for like all these roles we're supposed to fulfill. Like, I feel like thinking about what it means to be, for my son, he's about to be an older brother, and we're already inculcating with, you have to take care of your little sister, you have to do this, and it's like, how does that sort of get in the way of them having their own relationship to each other? So I think I like to put my characters in situations where those are sort of tested, but also to think about the ways in which that structure doesn't always serve us in the best way and what it's sort of based on, right? So very early on in the book, like one of the family structures is literally like the father owns everyone else in the family, right? And I'm thinking about how that sort of gets repeated in different generations, even though it's not like legally true, it becomes true in this way and it sort of gets troubled in really interesting ways.
Yeah, I mean, and with both of these lessons especially, there's something about, of course, right, if you're thinking of like African-American lit and history, major problem is that like you never have the right to protect or care for your own family in any kind of way, shape, or form. And I was thinking about this family relation too, in Michael, in your sense, the character, Kara, who like really, I think kind of like brings that idea home, right? It's like what, you can have a responsibility to people who you love, who you would like to be your family, but there's always somebody else externally who might have more say over what happens with them, and with regards to like where they live, what kinds of safety they have access to, et cetera, right? And that's something that comes up over and over again in these books. Related to this question about family is some mode of like devotion or a relationship to God, right? In many different ways, I think, across these books. Sometimes humorously, sometimes it's like the primary driver or like external force. And I wonder if y'all could talk about the relationship that your characters have to something like devotion. And even more so, how you choose the language to describe that devotion. I think oftentimes we get conversations where this is like, oh, we need to, sex being one form, right? Love and sex being one form of that devotion, but sometimes other things, like, doing fucked up shit in the night or something like that, right? As like a form of living or what have you. But this is a question I think comes up kind of over and over again in these books too. I wonder if you could talk about that kind of God-devotion relation and how you decide on the language for it.
I think I decided based on, being in church and my mother, it reflected my mother's relationship with God, and she's his servant. She's devoted to this idea of being of use. Mm-hmm. And this is like the black female thing, you must be of use. And so I think, this devotion to God is kind of like a terrible, a beautiful, terrible thing, because you end up neglecting so much of yourself, so much of our identity, trying to devote yourself to family, to community. And so the language of worship where I'm from, especially for me, especially for the women I knew, was how much you can give of yourself. Mm-hmm. And I've been fighting my whole life not to give none of that.
Yeah, I feel like for me, thinking about God, well, God has a big role in my book, but I mean, he's kind of the
literal God.
Yeah, literal God. he's like the main antagonist in this book.
But that's the thing, he is the main antagonist.
Yeah, he's the main antagonist. So yeah, I feel like for thinking about God in my book, so if we look at things from the devil's point of view, like stripping away everything you know about both our cultural associations with the devil and like what's actually in the Bible, which is very little about the devil, but it's the idea that there's this father who cast out his son and he's never allowed to come back in no matter what, right? And thinking about like what it means for that relationship to be sort of the core of how, like, I feel like Western society thinks of itself, right? And this idea that, like, there's this one individual who can never be forgiven at any point. And, like, what is that?
You can tell by the way people talk to each other.
It's like, as soon as you align somebody with the devil, you can do whatever to them. Like, they're out of your mind in this very particular way. And so God sort of is this person that's sort of sitting there allowing this to happen, not only allowing it to happen, but letting it be like the thing that defines his relationship to other people. Like, oh, if you go with this person, then you can't come with me, right? So I think I'm thinking about ways in which people, sort of similar to like how you were saying, Addie, like it's sort of, there's this way in which God can sort of fill this role in your life and sort of take up as much space as these characters sort of allow him. But I feel like what's more interesting is thinking about how characters sort of find God in each other, right? Or there's this idea that like when you devote yourself to other people in this way, there's this way in which you're taken care of and you're taking care of other people that can be a really beautiful relationship between people instead of this other entity who you're not really going to interact with. So I feel like a lot of my characters sort of find redemption and salvation in each other rather than looking sort of outward to another entity.
Oh, can I also add, in this story, men are gods. The pastor is a god, and so, of course, we've learned to just be able to worship manhood in this country. And so I think in the ways of we're taking back our power in this novel, I think. So, yeah, I think getting away from this idea of God as devotion is like reclaiming your power as a human, Am I?
I feel like we're getting into dangerous
So there's not really God in my book in the traditional sense, but I think the spirituality element in my book probably comes from, I think there's something that is kind of amazing that happens when we transcend ourselves in some way. We come closer to who we want to be or who we thought we were but didn't get to be or whatever. And I think the two activities that recur in my book in which you can really transcend yourself are working out and having sex. Because when you're doing both of those things, like those are activities where you can really put on a persona that you don't wear the rest of the time. And so one of the central conflicts in my book occurs because this 16-year-old Nathaniel is this very dorky kid who likes to have phone sex because that's how he sort of expresses himself, but he's not very good at it. And he finds that he becomes very good at it when he starts imitating his Haitian mentor, David. And so is that a spiritual experience? I don't know, but it's an experience.
Yeah, I mean, this is a good way to put it, Lucas, because I was thinking about like Nathaniel's devotion to David, like which is both David the person and his idea of David, which is the only thing that kind of really makes him be like, oh, I can feel like a person now. Because then he does start being like, oh, I can work out at the gym, like I feel more confident, starting to look and feel different, right? Like there isn't anything else besides that thing, right?
Yeah, I was really interested in, I went to a largely white suburban high school. I've been a teacher for a number of years, and I was really interested in this idea of white kids who aspire to blackness through sports stars, through celebrities, but then are also kind of racist or have, preconceived notions that are in conflict with being not racist. And so, yeah, that's a large part of the book.
Well, we all, look up in the sky sometimes and go, like, what's going on? Like, why right now? Why this, right? And I think as far as notions of God or spirituality or whatever's going on in Lay Your Armor Down, I think for me it's about, I think personally too, Mitch, is maybe why my characters are dealing with it, is it's become like more about the search and the questions. And I've got, I think character-wise, this is the leanest of my novels. There's only three. There's the three characters, and there's a little girl who doesn't speak. So I only had to have three people talking. But I think they're in this moment of crisis, and when you get in moments of crisis, they're questioning like literally everything that they have known up until this moment, this thing they have to deal with. Crisis of spirituality, I suppose, whether they're thinking about God or whatever, or just self-preservation. But I think through those moments of intensity, it does become spiritual, whether you want it to or not, however you define spirituality, emotionality, like whatever. But I think if spirituality is forced upon you, you don't have much of a choice but to deal with it, whether you want to or not. And you are going to look for answers wherever you can find them. And again, if that's God or nature or whatever it is, I guess that's really where it was. And I think the title, too, Lay Your Armor Down. I mean, I had that title sitting around for a long time, and to me, that suggests letting go, which is, I think, a hard thing for me to do. I won't say all of us again, but I've seen y'all nod enough at everything that's been said. Sometimes the decision you have to make to deal with whatever crisis or spiritual crisis, whatever's going on, is to lay it down and stop and just give up and let it be, and then let it rectify itself. And I have no idea if that was an answer to the question that was originally asked, but that was fun talking about it for a moment.
I think the only way that I would have been able to describe it more would give away so much of the book, but I think it is also this thing where God, or like the idea of God, is also a major antagonist or drives the action in kind of surprising ways too. And I will say the fact that there are three characters makes it a really good book to listen to, by the way, right? Because we do always get the sense that we kind of know to some degree what's going on, like their relationships intensify to each other as we go on, right? This is related to another thing that I want to bring up, which is, I think in all of these books, there is at least a handful of things that occur, let's say, that we would think of or call as like difficult material. By difficult, I mean for the way that we talk about reading culture, or what readers are capable of handling, or something like that, put it that way. And this is true with Nathaniel's like taking on the David persona and speaking to someone who is themselves not who he thinks that they are, who also is taking on a persona, right? This is true with these like relationships of patriarchy too. Addie, in your book especially, these kinds of forms of adoration for these men. Rickey, from like start to end, there is always a kind of high degree level of conflict that I think makes certain folks like squeamish, right? I've read parts of this book to people and they've been like, I can't really talk about that or something, So over and over again it happens, but also there's always moments that I think are incredibly funny in all of these books, whether or not one is allowed to think that they're funny. But I want y'all to talk a little bit about the relationship between those two things. But because sometimes there'll be something happen in Addie where I'm like, oh, this is deeply fucked up. I wish they did not like even respect this dude. But then Priscilla's talking shit about other people at the church or something, and it becomes like humorous almost immediately.
Well, I always say that's just the Mississippi thing, and Mississippi black thing, the creation of the blues. All this came from this fact that you have to do something to keep from screaming or crying sometimes. I have family members that I can't sit beside in funerals because we're gonna laugh, and the shit ain't funny. They did. Yeah. So I understand that's kind of a way to balance life. And there is some pretty traumatic stuff happening in the novel. And although the traumatic stuff is not funny, it's just the way we dealt with things. Maybe it's something we need to. I have gotten a therapist, but maybe it's just the way you deal with it and it's inappropriate. But it's the way you deal with it to keep from going nuts. And so I think humor is necessary to lighten the load. You don't want a war and peace. I didn't want to write a war and peace. I didn't want to write anything that was, So I'm also a funny person myself, So I knew my novel would have to be kind of like me, and it's my baby, So it's just the probably inappropriate response I've always had to trauma that maybe sets up the humor in my. Because I laughed out loud when I read it.
But like how inappropriate is it? Because you see other people are laughing too, right? So there's like a relationship to being at a funeral. I was talking to another writer and we were talking about like, oh yeah, what do you remember from like the crack epidemic? And then like 20 minutes into it, we were cracking up and he was like, damn, we need therapy. Like, this is like, like this should not be that funny. So there is that kind of like inbuilt relationship, I think, make it work. Here's Lucas.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're writing a book in which a 16-year-old kid from Newton, Massachusetts is pretending to be his Haitian mentor while having phone sex with a person who's pretending to be a Russian adult who's actually not, and it's very serious, that's probably not going to work that well to start, right? But I also think, I mean, a lot of the issues I'm dealing with in the book are serious, but they're also completely absurd when you think about them, like all of the ways we treat each other just based on, who we are. So just as an example, there's a character in this book who's a coyote who smuggles immigrants from Mexico to Texas, and the way he does it is by disguising them in whiteface as party clowns, and claiming that he's a sort of birthday party clown man who goes on both sides of the border. And this is like funny, but it's also, meant to get at the ridiculousness of the ways we kind of think about immigration and who belongs and who doesn't. So, I think that there are, I cut a line from the book that was, there are many people who drink themselves to death, but laugh as they're doing it. And I think that's, true about these big issues. They're dark and they're funny.
The world itself is rather absurd. So there's, even in the darkest moments, there's somebody can say something to just, it's almost like, like it was already mentioned before, if you weren't laughing, you'd be crying, And and too, like I'm a fan of like the Coen brothers, like dark comedies and things like that, and I think even in like moments when characters say something that are, sarcasm's good too in those moments. Like I was just sitting here thinking, there's one exchange in Armor where Keel and Burdine are really into the thick of it, and Keel is really kind of upset to find out this piece of information they got was not necessarily true. And Keel goes, I just can't believe she would lie about something like that. And Burdine goes, welcome to Earth. And then they just keep going. So I think that, plus I think we're trying to entertain ourselves through those moments too. So because this is supposed to be, writing is supposed to be fun too, I think. Is it?
Not historically, no.
I don't know.
No, I think for me, like a lot of my book is, based on oral history from my parents and grandparents, and not that they knew the devil personally, but like a lot of like figuratively, yeah. But I feel like my dad would always tell me these stories about like he was like one time when like he decided he didn't want a whooping, and so, or like more like a beating back then, but like so he tried to like outrun my granddad like really and like he was telling the story, and it ends with him getting beat pretty bad, but he's like laughing, and my uncles are dying laughing, and I'm just like, okay. It's pretty traumatic, but I feel like you were saying, there's this way in which you have to laugh to keep from crying, and I feel like that's the only way I learned my people's history, was these stories with people laughing, and then only backwards did I look at it and be like, oh, that was probably pretty messed up, and that may not should have happened, but it's the only way that they could transmit those stories to me, and that they could look back on them and understand them in this way, and have these shared, literally they were trauma bonded, my uncles, but yeah, so I think for me it was always embedded in how I understood stories to work. Like they always have those two elements, because that's what life is made up of.
Yeah, I mean, every time somebody describes like a story like that, I think like, oh, we're just now getting to the point where ass whoopings are maybe not funny. They were always very funny up until a certain point, right? Like we're only now reaching that, that era. Yeah, where maybe it's like, oh, maybe that wasn't that. Yeah, it wasn't that funny. I'm gonna ask y'all one more question, and then we're gonna have some time to take questions from the audience too. And this is like maybe a slightly more broad one, and it might hit on some stuff that folks have brought up already. But I'm interested in, what y'all think or feel a kind of serious novel should do, right? Like, what is the job in translating some of what you're invested in on the page to other people, right? And sometimes, right, on one end, clearly you can be like, oh, I want to make more clear a certain kind of like set of socio-political issues. For me, I'll give an example. For me, it's like I'm interested in changing what people want, right? In changing what people often desire from like beginning to end. But I'm curious about, what y'all feel about that and how you think about it when you're creating the work.
I think for me, the big thing is, like, I feel like a lot of my first reading experiences, what I took away was that after I finished that book, I felt less alone, or I understood something about myself I didn't understand before. Like, I remember for summer reading in high school, I was given Their Eyes Were Watching God, and I think before then, I didn't know that the way that my grandparents spoke could be literature or poetry, and I feel like that taught me something about myself. And the same thing with like reading Invisible Man and seeing those early chapters of racism he experienced. I felt less alone in my own experiences, right? So I feel like the big thing for me is like trying to find a way to like take what I've seen and known or heard or thought about and fashion it in such a way that it makes someone else understand something new about themselves, or understand something about themselves in a different way, or realize that they don't have to be ashamed of this thing that happened to them or that they did, because it's a common human experience.
Definitely in that vein. I want people to feel themselves, see themselves. I strive for visibility. You see yourself in my novel in ways you may have not seen yourself expressed in media before. So I want also in my novels to let people know that there's no certain way to write a novel. You don't have to reach for 13-letter words to sound smart. I'm all against intellectualism in fiction. Make a good story. You don't have to occlude what you're saying with, vocabulary. People always thought high art was inaccessible. I want my words to be accessible to everybody. And so I want to also encourage people to write their own stories. Your stories are worthy of being heard. You don't have to be a certain, you don't have to be a college graduate to write a story. There are stories everywhere, and everybody's story is worthy, And what people think is good is so subjective. Like that dude at the New York Times who reviewed my novel and didn't see it. All of that is subjective, and some people just ain't gonna get it. So write anyway, do it anyway, participate anyway, read anyway, and find yourself. I want people to find themselves in what I do. Like the stories that I read, showed me myself and showed me that I could, dare to write one day, and somebody might enjoy it. My novel is great. That's what they say now. Don't just take my word for it.
I call my book The Revenge of the Side Characters, because many of the people in the book have been sort of marginalized by their community, by their institution, by their family, sometimes by themselves. And the points of conflict come when they sort of decide to be the protagonists of their own life. And, I think as a gay kid growing up in the 80s and 90s, gay people then were still sort of the supporting character. Like, we were the comic relief, we were the best friend, whatever. And I was always like, I am not the supporting character here. I'm the star. And so I think what was important to me in writing this book was, I think we're in this moment, and maybe this is every moment in American history, but who counts, who matters, who's considered a real person. And I think in fiction, everyone counts, right? And that's what I think is important.
I just echo everything everyone has said. I mean, they've all said it very well. For me, there's no greater compliment than when someone says to you, read your novel, et cetera, you made me think about things I hadn't thought about before. That's an exceptional, probably my favorite of all things. But I don't think it's anything I don't really think about that when I set out to write a novel. I mean, when I get to the end of a novel, I'm pretty exhausted emotionally, and I feel like if I'm burned up and wasted emotionally, then there's a good chance the reader might feel some of those things as well. Somebody said this to me a long time ago. Can't remember who it was. I wish I did. But they said, when I read your story, I feel like I've been picked up in one place, and by the end, I've been taken to another place and set down. And I'm like, I think that's a compliment. But yeah, I mean, I think everything everybody has mentioned here about what you hope to get, I think, in sharing any art form is connection and people feeling inclusion and people learning. And I mean, that's why reading's cool, man. We could go on forever, but that's it.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to kind of transition to asking, to letting the audience ask a couple questions. So thank y'all for being here with us. But if there's any questions in the audience, please, raise y'all's hands. We don't have a mic that goes around, but I'm pretty sure we'll be able to hear it, and then I can repeat the questions as well. Right here, please.
If you were doing a book reading, what part of your book would you share?
I always share the part of my story where the mother recognizes her son as someone she doesn't know and has never known. And so that point of realization is important to me because it kind of directs the rest of the novel, because she recognizes herself also as someone she's never really known, too. So.
Yeah, I think for me, the opening pages, which is kind of like a rewriting of Genesis from the devil's perspective, it sort of ends with the deal he makes with Jesus. So, because I feel like it kind of embodies the relationships that happen, because in this book, Jesus and the devil are brothers, and it's also about their relationship and their relationship to their father, too, and that sort of gets repeated over and over across the generations.
I've had a lot of chances to read the phone sex scenes, and I've never done it. But since this is a hypothetical question, I like the idea of doing it.
I would say page 230. That's not as random as it sounds. My first 3 book tour events, I was in conversation with someone, and they were like, you want to read a little? It's like, yeah, I'll read a little, but you pick it out. First event in Oxford with my buddy John T. Edge sitting back there. He opens the book, hands me page 230. I come to Lemuria in Jackson. I'm with Johnny Evans on stage at Cathead Distillery. He goes, I want you to read something. I'm like, sure. He opens page 230 and hands it to me. I get to Atlanta, and I'm with Chuck Reese at the Writers at the Wrecking Bar. He's asked me before, do you want to read a little something? I'm like, sure. He goes, well, I got something picked out. I said, don't tell me what it is. Just give it to me when we get up there. He opened the book and handed me page 230. So there's something magical about page 230. I would read that if I was you.
It's about this destiny question, too.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, please. Psychoanalysis question. Everything. Were y'all able to hear it? Okay. It was about a question about where you grew up, what your childhood was like, and what your kind of reading influences were.
He gonna say I'm doing TMI, but I'm not gonna do TMI. I'm a church kid from Clarksville, Mississippi. I used to read in church Harlequin romances right in the middle where the sex started. And so I always knew I wanted to write because I was taught to read early by my mom. And I had kind of wacky life. My mom she is the first woman in government in my city, Clarksville, Mississippi. So they're just getting women on the city council in 2025. So it just tells you how ridiculous that is. So it's a very conservative, traditional kind of place while being dirt poor and backwards. So I always knew I wanted to write, And, my mom had 5 husbands. So it was kind of like, I wanted to write myself out of this. Because this. Yeah, that. She wanted to marry her. She didn't want to fornicate. She wanted to marry everybody. Oh my God. I love you, Mom. I'm sorry.
Are we all answering this?
Everybody's like, I don't know that.
How do you follow that? So I grew up in West Tennessee, not too far from here, like an hour north of Memphis. I grew up on a farm. We had pigs, we had cows, we had fields that Anyway, so I grew up going around with my granddad, taking care of stuff and listening to his stories, and that's where a lot of the book came from. But then also too, I remember one of my great uncles, they were saying something to my granddad. He's like, June would cut you if you look at him funny. And I was like, my granddad? And so I feel like that got me interested in thinking about how people change over the course of their lives and what initiates that change. So I think for me, part of my interest in a lot of my characters is thinking about, okay, this is who they are at the beginning of their life, and this is who they are at the end of their life. What were the things that made them different or made them become that person? And also too, so where I grew up, my family, so they were enslaved in East Tennessee on the border of Virginia and Tennessee on the Acadia plantation. And then in 1870, they moved to where my family still is now. And so I would say that definitely had an influence on the arc of the story I wanted to tell.
I'm from Newton, Massachusetts, which is also where my character Nathaniel is from. That is where our similarities diverge. But Newton is one of those places that is, pretty ostensibly liberal and, kind of says the right thing in terms of diversity, but then, that is not always the case in how it looks. And I think one of the questions that I was interested in writing the book was as a teenager, hypocrisy seemed like the worst possible thing to me. You say this, but it's not like that. And I think one of the things I was thinking about with the book is is hypocrisy the worst thing? Is the worst thing trying to do the good thing and not doing it? And maybe there's something worse, not attempting at all. So kind of thinking through some of those issues was big for me.
Grew up in South Mississippi, Southern Baptist preacher's kid, moved around a lot. I think that helped with my imagination. The Bible stories were the first stories I knew. So when people ask me, why is your work so dark? I say it's because the Bible stories were the first stories I knew. And then I think, too, gospel music. My mom is sitting right here, played the piano. And so when you're a Southern Baptist preacher's kid, from the time you can stand up on your own without falling over, you're in the choir.
Yeah.
So I was always around music, and I think the lyricism of language that finally came out when I started writing has a great deal to do with being around music all the time, too.
I have a question for all of y'all. How do you balance stereotypical views of Southerners, which are sometimes true and also humorous, with authentic characterization of Southern characters?
I don't even think about that. I just write people, just get it started. And, people are going to take from it what they want to take from it anyway. Often the stereotypes are in people's minds and not in your characters, so I just, they just behave like humans do. So I try to not even think about stereotypes, especially being from the Delta, or I'd just be mad. So, yeah.
I think she used the word human. I think that's a good way. I don't really think about it either. I'm just trying to create a living, breathing human being. I think I've been asked the differences in writing like a man and a woman too. And I'm like, I'm just trying to create a human, you know? So I think you just, you know, we're all as unique as we can be. And if you just don't think about it and you set out to create a person, they may have some stereotypical traits, but that doesn't necessarily define them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the question I'm always asking of my characters is like, what would this person do next? Like, really? And I think you just follow that until it ends.
Yeah, the same. I feel like at some point I felt like each of the characters in my book, I felt like I was that person, at least in that moment, or like I'm pulling something from myself from it, so I can't be stereotypical about myself. Yeah, I don't know.
Hey, right behind you.
I was wondering, while you were writing, how much were you thinking about audience and your audience through that sort of
I feel like I could only start writing once I stopped thinking about the audience. When I started like thinking about, because I feel like when I first started writing fiction, I had in my mind all these ideas about what it was supposed to do and how it was supposed to be. But I think once I let that go and just really started thinking about, do I like the sound of this sentence? Do I like what's happening? And then I feel like once you find that thing, like if you're, like I forget who said it, but it's like if you're not crying, the reader's not crying. If you're not laughing, the reader's not laughing. So you let go of this idea that you're building something for someone else and just you're making it for yourself. And then if other people love it, that's wonderful.
Definitely release yourself, because you'll be frozen. You won't write a word if you think about what people will think about it, because they're gonna infer so much of you in the story anyway. It's like, is this you? No, I made this shit up. So you know, let that go. Mm-hmm. Well, some of it's you, but you know, no, you know, they're gonna judge it anyway. Okay.
I think social media has made it, for me personally, it was a struggle at first because like when you're on Twitter or used to be on Twitter, you know, you're always saying, I was always like doing disclaimers of what I'm not saying before I'm saying the thing I am saying, because you want to sort of preemptively defend yourself against whatever. And I think when you're writing a novel, you just have to put all of that away and just be true to the stories and true to the characters.
Yeah, when you start thinking about audience, you're thinking about writing for other people, and you're not writing for yourself. And that's what you have to do first.
I know that sounds trite, but you definitely have to write what you want to read first, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's useful because a lot of what you're saying basically hinges on like bad faith, too, right? Like the bad faith that you know exists or you're reminded of all the time, especially if you go on the internet for 10 seconds about anything. Somebody already hates you before you ain't even said nothing. Yeah. They don't know who you are, what you look like. There's at least a couple people who are already mad at you, so you might as well just kind of keep it going, right? We have time for another question or two. Yeah, please.
Why the titles?
Yeah.
Yours changed. Like,
Mine
right before,
changed.
Yeah.
So it started out Sins of the Father, and then after my advisor very smartly circled four words I wrote in there at some point. She said, "This is your title," and it became The Devil 3 Times. And then when I sold the book, they were like, "No, that's All God's Children." And so I was like, oh, it was All God's Children for like a year. And then it came back to The Devil 3 Times after a new publisher came in. It's like, I don't like that title. So, but I feel like originally when I had it, the lines that my advisor underlined, I was thinking about how, you know, in the Southern Black Church, you know, to be called to preach, it's like you got to be called 3 times. Right, and it's like you got to deny God's call the first 2, and then that third one, that's when it sticks, that's when it's undeniable. And so I was playing with that idea a little bit. Also, too, I was thinking about how a lot of stories, like, so this book is heavily influenced by Zora Neale Hurston's folklore. Like the devil in her stories is like owes the world to the devil in my stories, and a lot of those are based on West African folk tales that, you know, were like remnants of Yoruba and Yoruba religion and voodoo and other, and there's a divinity there, Isu Ilegbara, and his number is 3. And so like a lot of the stories we get from that folklore and has to do with the number 3, so that's where mine came from.
I had never heard the calling theme from anybody else besides people from my neck of the woods, so it's funny. The original name of my novel was In the Image of the Beast, but they were picking out this part of my novel where the Reverend says to women he gave a womb and to men he gave dominion, hallelujah. And so that's how, after we talked it out, it became dominion, because I think In the Image of the Beast was a little too literal, but yeah, that was, I didn't necessarily pick it. Somebody picked it for me, just like.
I like it though.
Thank you.
It's a good
Thank you.
title.
Strong. Thank you. And that was a good title too.
Thank you.
So a slip in boxing is a defensive move to avoid a punch, but if you do it well and pivot afterwards, you can change your circumstances, and so it's sort of a double meaning.
I had Lay Your Armor Down sitting around as a title for about 10 years. I knew I would use it at some point for something, but there's just something about the phrase that really struck me, and so this novel fit.
That's a very cool title.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question from the audience before we have to go. One more. Yeah, please, right up front.
So all of your stories take place in the South. Would your story be different if it took place someplace in the northern?
I definitely think it would make less sense because there's so much of this community in your business type thing that really primarily exists in small southern town where people have nothing else to do but be in your business. So I think definitely, it is a southern tale. It may with adjustments be able to be told somewhere else, but it feels like Mississippi to me,
Yeah, I feel like the same thing. I remember when my wife came home to visit, and my mom was super into soap operas, and she was talking to someone else about something that happened at church. She was like, "Oh, is she still talking about that soap opera?" I was like, "No, that's that's just life." So yeah, it wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think it would be very difficult. The first time I came to Austin from the Northeast, I had a friend who ran a nonprofit, and she'd gotten Bill Clinton to come as a fundraiser, and I wore a dark suit because I was like, okay, it's the president, and people thought I was in the Secret Service. There were flip-flops and Hawaiian shirts, and so going from this buttoned-up place to this looser place was important for the book.
No, I don't think armor would be any different. There are novels of mine that would be different if they were somewhere else, but I don't think armor. I mean, there's woods and darkness everywhere.
It's a great place to end. Woods and darkness everywhere. Everybody thinking about that. Thank y'all all for writing the books and being so gracious with answering questions, and thank y'all all for coming too.